seen, things that we've heard, things that we've encountered, and things we wish the hell never would have happened, but they did anyway. So I usually start off these conversations by asking for a show of hands. How many of you would say that this year you actually experienced the best year for weed control that you've ever had in your life with absolutely no problems or no challenges whatsoever?
Corner beans.
Doesn't matter. That's usually the same number of hands I've got every time I've asked that. I guess in large respect across much of the geography in Illinois, we would probably say this year is the year that the wheels fell off the wagon. For those of you, for example, if anybody been through Champaign County recently, it's probably about as bad as I've ever seen it before. A couple of these species in particular of greatest concern. Number one is mare's tail. North to south, east to west, it's very, very common to see mare's tail, especially poking above no-till soybean fields. Now, I will be the first to admit to you that we certainly do not have the amount of data, nor have we screened our populations here in Illinois to anywhere near the extent that the groups, the folks at Purdue have for Indiana, or that Dr. Laux has at Ohio State, for resistance to glyphosate. But if you look at the morphology of these plants, how they look, how they responded to that burn down application that had glyphosate in it, they look exactly like glyphosate resistant mare's tail plant looks. So in essence, what our recommendation or what our general broad statement is across most of Illinois is go ahead. It's probably safer to assume that most of the mare's tail now in Illinois is glyphosate resistant. Now again, we say that without any actual hard data. But anecdotally, again, these plants just exactly mimic what a truly glyphosate-resistant mare's tail plant would look like. So that really brings in a lot of questions about what could we do to better manage these things, especially in the no-till soybean. Now, for most of about the northern two-thirds of Illinois, most of the mare's tail is still behaving like a winter annual. So in other words, it's going to be germinating here in the fall of the year. It's going to overwinter as a rosette of leaves, and it's going to resume growth come early part of the spring. So that little piece of information, probably one of the more consistent timings to try to control the mare's tail is in the fall. And certainly fall applications, we've done the work, a lot of other groups have done the work down through the years. The consistency of performance on fall emerged mare's tail is always better in the fall than typically what it is in the spring. Especially if you think about it, if in reality these populations are resistant to glyphosate and our spring burn down is Roundup and 2,4-D, the 2,4-D is not going to be enough to carry this. Typically, what we suggest people consider in the fall of the year, if you're going after mare's tail, fall emerged mare's tail, a couple points to remember. Number one, it doesn't have to be complicated. Number two, it doesn't have to be expensive. And number three, we really don't want anybody spending $30 an acre on residuals in the fall of the year. Okay, we need that money spent more in the spring of the year for some of the summer annuals that we have. So typically, our suggestion is to start out with a quart rate of 2,4-D ester in every load that goes out in the fall. Now, why do we recommend a quart? There's two reasons. Number one, you can, and number two, it works. Those are the only two reasons that we've got. Okay? If you want to add something to that, go ahead and do that. If you're early, if you're chasing the combine out of the field, if you want to add something that does have a little residual in the fall, go ahead. But it doesn't necessarily have to be that complicated. Second species of concern, of course, continues to be Palmer amaranth. Did anybody find any new infestations of Palmer this year? Yeah, I've had several samples here through the plant clinic here within the last couple of days. One from around Neoga, I believe, had photographs sent from, I think, south of Ursa the other week, and I can't remember where the third one came from. We do have what possibly could be a new situation developing. Has anybody here put out any new CRP plantings recently, like this year or last year? Anything within like the pollinator habitat program or the bobwhite quail thing? If you have, please go look at it. We've got a situation where it looks like there's an outside possibility that in a pollinator planting, that some of that seed mix that was used to establish that was contaminated with Palmer seed. Okay? That's one way to describe it, yes. And it's a massive infestation that we've seen. Okay? We really don't know for sure if there's a cause and effect. It's in a CRP setting. You wouldn't think, well, who cares there? It's really not going to be competing with corn and soybean. But if those female plants are allowed to make seed and that seed is shed, that seed will move. It can move. There's a very good likelihood ultimately it will find its way into a cornfield or a soybean field somewhere. So if you find them, get rid of them, mow them down, chop them out, put them in a bag, get them out of the field, whatever you need to do. But at the very least, it's well worth the time and effort to go take a walk and take a look. That's one species, we really are trying to be you cannot overemphasize how important it is to keep your eyes out for that. Once that thing becomes established in the state of Illinois, we are going to have a major headache. We are not set for Palmer in Illinois yet. We haven't got enough spray rigs in the state to handle what would be coming, and we haven't got enough people who know how to run it. That's how critical this actually is going to be. Right. Last one, of course, is water hemp. Probably without a doubt, I've seen more of this atop of soybeans, irrespective of where we are in the state. It's easy to see it in the south, the west, the east, the north, and the central part of the state. To give you an update on our most recent sampling, and we published these maps probably a couple of months ago for the state of Illinois. We have 102 counties in Illinois, and we have absolutely no reason to assume that we could not find glyphosate-resistant water hemp in 102 counties. It is everywhere. Now you may say, well, okay, so we'll just start adding more Flexstar in the tank, more Cobra in the tank, until you follow up with the next distribution map now with PPO resistance. We can probably find that also in every one of the 102 counties in the state. Now, if you had only one or the other, and you want to stick in your current system, whether it's in a conventional bean or a Roundup Ready bean, you just switch to the other product, right? If you got glyphosate resistance, you go to PPO. If you got PPO, you go to glyphosate. The unfortunate thing about publishing those maps the way that we did is that they really don't reveal the true problem, and that is when you put both of those types of resistances together. And we're not talking about in the same field, we're talking about in the same plant. So if you've got a plant that has resistance alleles to both glyphosate and PPO, what are your post options? See a little string trimmer right over there? Take the spool off, put a brush blade on, and take a walk. That's your option. We have no chemical options for it to grow. Okay? That's the scary part. Now, why do you think it is that we continue to see more and more PPO resistance around the state of Illinois? Some think it's because we've added, well, when the Roundup stopped working, we started adding the Ultra Blade, the Cobra, the Flexstar, and the Roundup. That's part of it, but that's really not the total explanation. What have we used more in soybean in the last 5 years than we did any time in the preceding 15, 20 years we've had Roundup Ready soybeans?
PPO.
Where? When? Pre-emergence, right? Valor, Authority are also PPOs. That's part of the reason. That's why this frequency of PPO resistance is also going up. Okay? We have to realize that each time that we make an application, we are selecting for that type of resistance to evolve in the population. It doesn't matter if it's soil applied, it doesn't matter if it's foliar applied, folks. We need to think about this thing very, very carefully. Part of the reason why is that we've got these dioecious pigweeds, two-way resistance, and I don't mean to sound arrogant or flippant when I say this. Two-way resistance is pretty common anymore. We don't even get excited about that. Three-way is common. Okay, we've got four-way resistance in Illinois. And now we've actually got a population of about 5 miles from my office. Five-way resistance. Okay? That would include things like the ALS inhibitors. It would include the PPO inhibitors, the triazine, the HPPD chemistry. Somebody want to guess what the fifth one is? Try 2,4-D. Based on our dose response work in the greenhouse, that population is about 30-fold resistant to 2,4-D. Now you want the scary part of that? How many times do you think that field was actually treated with 2,4-D before we discovered that population? How about 0? Now how does that work? How do you evolve resistance to a herbicide to which that population has never been previously exposed? Okay. Obviously it can, because it did. The key element here, folks, is that we're also now moving into an era where we're seeing less and less evolution of resistance by target site resistance, but we're seeing more and more now due to metabolic resistance. And metabolic resistance is not a good thing. Okay. If that becomes widespread across the state, it really pretty much renders our predictive ability completely useless. Because if we would have said, if the farmer would have said, hey, I missed this thing with I think he used Callisto on the field. If we missed it with Callisto, we had no idea that 2,4-D would be completely ineffective. Here's the other part of that population that's got us a little bit more concerned even this year. We've characterized its response to 2,4-D in the greenhouse with some very detailed work. We never characterized it in the greenhouse. We never characterized its response to dicamba. Anybody want to know why? because in the 2 preceding years in the field, when we would put on quarter pound or half pound of dicamba acid, it pretty much responded like it should have. Okay. This year, it didn't. Matter of fact, right now, we have plants that are marked in that field that survived not just a pint of clarity, but a pint and a half. So in one season, okay, it went from being fairly well controlled with dicamba to, we're gonna have to move up the screening process now for dicamba. Okay, it can't happen, it's going to happen. Now, one other thing to keep in mind, especially with water hemp and resistance mechanisms, once these alleles are in this population, they don't leave. So in other words, if you haven't sprayed, let's say, if you hadn't sprayed your soybean field with Pursuit in 10 years, and I think that's probably fairly reasonable statement, if you would go back next year and use Pursuit against water hemp in that field, guess what? It's a respray. It's not going to work. Okay. It's the same thing with the glyphosate. It's the same way with all these traits and characteristics. So we've gone now and taken this one particular species that 25 years ago, as we said before, nobody even knew what the thing was in the state of Illinois. It's our dominant driver species right now. It accumulates resistance mechanisms, and they don't leave. Now, you might think the simple solution is we'll just wait for something new to come out, right, and we'll fix this problem. That's not going to happen. We don't really expect to see any new novel target sites in the next 5 years. Hell, I don't even know if I'll see one before I retire. Of course, that's kind of a tricky statement because Springfield may retire me 6 months from now. I don't know. I'll have to ask that for sure. Yeah. So, that's where we are. This is not going to go away, folks. We have to really be on our toes about this. Now, a couple of remarks about some of the new trait platform packages that may or may not be in the marketplace in 2017. Before we talk about those 3, remember that you've got one right now that's fully approved, fully available, and it does work on a lot of these resistant populations. That's the Liberty Link soybean system. It can work. All right. I found more resistance to Liberty in farmers than I have in weeds. Okay, for whatever the reason is. But we have to remember, it's not a Roundup. It never has been. It never will be. If we apply it like we apply a Roundup, a lot of times that's going to be a complaint field. We have to do it differently. In our work at Illinois down through the years with Liberty Link soybeans, we've never seen one post shot of Liberty only that's ever looked nearly as good and consistent as has that post application of Liberty that followed a good pre-emergence herbicide. Pre's are an absolute must in my opinion, and our data I think would fully support that. Okay. It's not something where we're going to go back and start spraying and controlling weeds this fall. We should not do that. They're going to have to be here. Okay. That being said, the Enlist soybean system from Dow AgriSciences, where you've got resistance to both glyphosate and 2,4-D, and actually resistance to glufosinate. Okay, so you can actually use Liberty on those traits, or at least it has that resistance mechanism. It's fully approved. It's deregulated. That label is in place. The one thing holding up that trait package is that they still do not have Chinese import approval. They don't know when they're going to get it. My bet is the Chinese don't even know when they're going to grant it. So we don't really know for sure where that's going to play out in 2017. Our conversations with Dow, they are pretty much saying that we're not going to bring this trait platform into the market until we get that key import approval. Okay. The dicamba soybean system. Good technology. We like all 3 of these trait platforms. We do hope that all 3 of them will enter into the marketplace. One thing we've tried to make people aware of with the dicamba soybean is the fact, quite frankly, folks, I think the expectations on this technology are set way too high. From what I've heard primarily from farmers, a lot of people seem to think, well, this is all that we need to fix this problem that we see in the field this year. We can go back and use Roundup like we used to use Roundup when it really worked, and we can go back and spray in weeds when they're this tall. Trust me, if you do that, you're going to be sorely disappointed. Keep in mind one point. When glyphosate was still effective, before we had evolved resistance to glyphosate in water hemp, okay, how would you characterize glyphosate effectiveness against water hemp? How would you describe it if you had to give me a term? What would you say it is? Fair, good, poor, excellent, what? I would call it excellent.
It was good.
No, I call it excellent. I mean, hell, we've got data back at, a pint rate of the old Roundup formulation would kill water hemp this big. It was excellent. It flat out did not miss. Okay. folks, dicamba is good. It is not excellent on pigweed. It never has been. It never will be. We cannot do this and expect to have good control. We'll get good, decent control right here.
At a pint of clarity, what would be the weed height?
Right here.
Water.
If we do this, we're going to miss it. Okay. The other thing to consider, Terry, that's a good point to bring up. Okay, dicamba is good, decent to good on water hemp, but you have to think about it in a couple different ways. If you would score how effective it is, say you would do a visual assessment like what Darren does on plots here, or what we do at Champaign or Banff. If you score that effectiveness based on, let's say, just a biomass reduction of a treated plot versus a non-treated plot, all right, on a scale of 0 to 100, typically dicamba is going to run anywhere from maybe 85 to 95%. Okay? If you score mortality, how many of those treated plants actually die? That's a different number. Okay? If we treat these, and if we don't have the appropriate rate, or they're too big, and for whatever the reason is, they're not dead at the end of the year, what have we just done? That's another cycle selection. Now, arguably 20 years ago, when we first started, or however long it's been now, 20 years ago when glyphosate-resistant soybean came into the marketplace, you could make the argument, and anybody could do this, that was literally the first year that we began the selection for evolution of resistance in summer annuals. Okay. Anybody want to disagree with that? Because before you had Roundup Ready soybeans, when did you use Roundup in your soybean system or corn system anymore? You used it as a burnout, right? Targeting what? Primarily the winter annuals. All right. So 96 we began the selection for the summer annuals. Folks, you cannot make that same argument with either 240 or dicamba. We've used dicamba in the state of Illinois now for 50 some odd years. Okay, so that selection has already taken place. We're 50 years into evolving resistance to that. Okay? If we start doing this now, this height with this water hemp stuff with dicamba, I'll give it about 3 years. And then we're going to have a problem there. Okay? It's good technology. We hope it comes into the marketplace. One of the other big limitations about dicamba, of course, is if you had to pick of all the 3,000 some odd species known to grow in the state of Illinois, what is the one that's most sensitive to dicamba? That would be non-dicamba soybean. Okay. Any of you seen in the farm press, they had a little incident, say, in Boot Hill, Missouri, and western Arkansas, and eastern Tennessee, or, well, I'm sorry, I got to flip those back, eastern Arkansas, western Tennessee. Little soybean growth regulator type injury symptoms that developed on there. Anybody heard about that? Guess who else has heard about that? That would be the United States Environmental Protection Agency. They actually issued a memo last week. I've never seen them issue a memo before. Basically, it said, we're aware of this, and we will take this into consideration in our deliberation about whether or not to label this technology. Folks, there are no dicamba products labeled yet. Now, I don't necessarily think that what has happened this year is going to result in not getting a label. I would be absolutely shocked if what happened this year did not further, or will not further introduce other use restrictions once that label is granted. Okay. And finally, the last one is the HPPD resistant technology. I'm sure you're going to hear about this today. The balanced GT system. We've looked at this now for about 3 years, and each of the 3 years that we've looked at it, we've stuck it north of here to Kankakee on that Palmer and Amaranth plot. If anybody went there to that field tour we had 2 or 3 years ago, you've got an idea what the population density is there. What we really like about the technology is the ability to actually combine multiple effective herbicides together. Now, 2 or 3 years ago, we ended up, or I guess last year, we actually published the work. We looked at the question, the age-old question around resistance. Is it better to rotate chemistry from one year to the next? Or is it actually a better way to mitigate the evolution of resistance by exposing a population to more than one herbicide every time that you spray? Okay. When we did this, we had about what we counted up 500 site years of data. That's a lot. And what our analysis said is that it's actually a better mechanism to actually incorporate or tank mix together multiple effective herbicides every application. That's a better way to stave off resistance than simply going from a Roundup technology one year to a Liberty the next. reminding folks applies not only just to post-applications, that also applies to residual herbicides that we apply to the soil surface. So when Bear brought this technology out, we've actually got a fairly large study underway right now on that 5-way resistant population in Champaign County. We're taking isoxaflutol, which is going to be the base herbicide, obviously, and we're combining it with either 1, 2, 3, or 4 other active ingredients. Try to find out what is going to be the best mixture to come up with in order to expose these populations again to multiple effective herbicides. We're going to be able to use that in this technology. We think that's the key value of what farmers can do in the near future with that. We're going to be a bit more limited with either the Enlist system or the Extend system, what we can combine with it. You're going to have to go to a website. You're going to have to look up whether or not you can add this or that with that technology. EPA is not going to allow you just to put anything in that tank that you want to. It's going to have to be approved through wind tunnel testing to make sure that that doesn't change the spray dynamics and drop